civil and coastal engineer.
Progress.
And we're recording. I am a civil and coastal engineer with the firm of Dalton, Olmsted and Fuglevan. I am leading our technical team, which is made up of a number of other firms that we work with and are teamed with. And it's a multidisciplinary team. And so, as I said, I'm the engineer. We have scientists of every flavor and type on the team. We have biologists, we have risk assessors. We have historians, you name it. We have probably one or three of them on the team to help support all the various analyses that need to be done.
Don't forget geologists.
Geologists too, yes, and hydrogeologists. And if it's got an IST on the name of it, we probably got one or two of them on the team just to make sure we keep everything straight. So, and again, I am also supported by a bigger team, which includes Jim Mall here, Jim Darling, whose name's on the screen there, Maya Bellin, who you already heard of, and then Chris and Joy, as far as community outreach. And so we are all working together to try and advance this project and meet the ecology requirements, which we'll get into a little bit more. So why are we here? Why are we doing this? We didn't just wake up one morning and go, hey, it'd be really neat. No, this is a problem that's been building here in Budd Inlet for decades. And it's not uncommon. All these industrial waterways, waterfronts, a big place of commerce, big place of industry, has been for decades. Those activities, businesses that were here in the past doing legal activities, practices of the day, have led to legacy contamination in the sediments of Budd Inlet that lingers there. And that contamination continues to pose environmental detriments, primarily to the food web. And so we have benthic organisms, worms, little shellfish, etc., that live in the sediments. They get the chemical burden into their body. They then get eaten by higher level animals. And that continues to the point where eventually we as humans are consuming those animals. And then those contaminants get into us. And so that's how the contaminants in the sediment reach their way up to become a human health issue. And so right now, the port, working with ecology and actually under an order with ecology that I'll get into in a minute, is taking the lead for the cleanup and remediation of Budd Inlet. And so what I'll go over here today is just a little bit on the historical uses of the inlet. Where did the contamination come from? What is it? Why is it there? Talk a little bit about what we're envisioning for the cleanup and restoration. And again, that's a vision today. We have a lot of data we have to collect. We have a lot of analysis we have to do, but we have to pick a direction we think we are heading as we build all this information and do this analysis to eventually come up with a remedy that meets ecology's requirements for remediating Budd Inlet. We'll talk a little bit about the funding, because where's the money come from? That's always a concern to everybody. And so we'll touch on that. Talk a little bit about the timeline. These are long lead projects. There's a lot of things that have to go on, but we have to be looking down the horizon as we plan. Otherwise, we'll never get to an end point. And then we'll take any questions. And I'm more than happy to take questions as we go. Stop every few slides. Please jump in at any time. I love talking about this stuff. I'm very interested in it. I am happy to share with you my knowledge. We just try and get through this evening here within our timeline, and then we can go deeper on any of these subjects in the future. And so here in Budd Inlet, like many industrial waterways, was a heart of development. Some of the earliest development in many of these areas was on the waterfront. Ships came in, products came in, things were made. We had a lot of wood treating plants down here, like we have throughout a lot of the Northwest. Treating poles, treating telephone poles, treating wood become pilings for marine construction, etc. And with that, we had the chemicals that they used to treat those materials, but we also had the wood products themselves. And so log rafts were brought in, log rafts bumped against each other, bark and wood chips fell on the bottom of the bay. There's debris from it. There's oils from the uplands portions of the site. There's a marine terminal that had fueling facilities out here on the uplands. So there's been a lot of different varied commercial activities out here on the Port Peninsula and the surrounding shorelines of East and West Bay going back for decades. Their practices led to the contamination that's in the sediments today, plus stormwater from outfalls is always another concern that likely has some input to the overall contamination out there. And so when we talk about the contaminated sediments in Budd Inlet, we have a couple of primary contaminants of concern. So that's one of our first acronyms, COC, contaminant of concern. Our main contaminants that we have out here are dioxin-furans, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which we call PAHs for simple because I get tired of saying those three long words. And then we also have PCBs, which have similar properties to the dioxin-furans. Those are our main contaminants that we have out here that we're looking at the moment. They're all dangerous in the food web at those very low concentrations, as I mentioned, and they don't break down over the time. So they are a very persistent chemical in the environment that, unless we actually remediate it, tends to just stay there over time. And then we have a couple of other confounding issues here. Not only do we have the contaminated sediment that's out there, we also have a sedimentation problem in that we are losing navigable draft to both the Swantown Marina and to the marine terminal. And so those channels that are supposed to be at 30-foot deep, low tide in the deep draft channel, 12 or 13 feet deep in the shallow draft channel, now are less than that. So instead of being 30-foot deep in places, it's 28-foot deep. And so that starts to create problems for safe navigation of vessels coming in and out of the marine facilities. Pause there for a minute. I rolling along here, just see if anybody has any questions or comments you want to jump in with, give you a chance. Otherwise, we'll keep moving on. Quiet on the screen, quiet in the audience. We'll just keep plowing on.
I do.
There is, sorry, hi. This is
Hi.
So there is a question, you were mentioning navigable waters. So does the Corps of Engineers have a role in this if these are considered navigable waters?
Yes, normally they would. If the site was not contaminated, we would give our friends at the Corps of Engineers a call and say, hey, your channels are getting kind of filled in and it's impacting our navigation. And they would say, oh, let's see what we can do to get that on our dredging schedule in the future. Unfortunately, we call them now and they say, yeah, you guys are in the middle of a contaminated site and we don't dredge contaminated sites. And so until the remediation is completed, the Corps will not come back in and dredge the navigation channels.
And when the Corps does come in, thank you for that clarification. I just wanted that to be on the record. And also when the Corps does come back in and dredges the channel, do they do that of their own accord? That's included. They do that on a regular basis without any charge to us?
Yes, the Corps is responsible for maintaining the federally authorized navigation ways.
Perfect. Good answer. Thank you.
We didn't quite hear your name when you asked the
Oh, I'm
question.
sorry.
Oh, no, not you, Rob.
Joanna Manson. I was one of the candidates for Port District 4. How are you, Camille? We met.
Yeah, thank you. We appreciate it. Just the audience, so we know who's asking. We can't see your name on screen. So thank you.
Very well. Well, thank you. Those were great questions. So just to continue moving on here. And so who's responsible? You know, we got these contaminants out there. People were out here. They were running businesses. They were doing stuff. They were making money. And now we got this issue. Well, who's responsible? Well, the port owned the land. And the port leased the land to people that were out here that did business. And so the port, as the landholder, becomes what, in all honesty, is somewhat the low-hanging fruit. Department of Ecology can go, hey, you guys own the land. The activities happened on your land. Hence, you are a PLP, a potentially liable party. And they say, okay, now we got you, port. Be great for you to clean that up. And then the port, or whoever the potential liable party is, has the obligation to then potentially identify other potentially liable parties, seek cost recovery, etc. But right now, the Port of Olympia has stepped up and been identified by the Department of Ecology as the lead entity for the remediation of Bud Inlet. And they've done that via what's called an agreed order. And the first agreed order between the port and ecology was put in place 15 years ago, going on 15 years ago, in December of 2008. And so this project has been working its way through the ecology system for the last 14, going on 15 years now. It started with some initial investigation, as these projects often do. That leads to some more investigation. That led to some initial remediation and dredging over in the berth area, monitoring of sediments that were coming down from underneath the marine berth pier there. Then it went to a larger study called the study area, which I'll show you in a minute, but it's an area focused on the Port Peninsula out here, and that was in 2012. And then just now recently here in May of 2023, the port and the Department of Ecology entered amendment number 2 to the agreed order, which then sets up the work that needs to be done over the next few years. And that document, that AO amendment, requires that we do certain studies, requires that we produce certain documents, that we give those documents to ecology, the regulating entity. The port is the regulated entity. So even though we are working cooperatively, ecology is still the authority that we have to work under and satisfy. We do a number of deliverables with them. One of them was a alternatives memo. The next one we had to do was a data gaps memo that explains what data we are missing out here to move forward with design. And we are now working cooperatively with ecology to try and get in the field and do additional data collection. That's collecting sediments, sending them to the lab, having them analyzed for our contaminants of concern, so we can come up with a better map of where contamination is, the nature and extent of contamination, as we call it, in Butt Inlet in a 3-dimensional way. So where is it located horizontally? And then how deep do the contaminants go? So that requires that we go out and do quite an in-depth investigation process to figure that out. And then just in terms of the overall cleanup process under MATCA, we have this nice little graphic over here that the Department of Ecology produces, and it shows the steps that are necessary to go through the state MATCA cleanup program. And so you start off up there with discovery of a problem. Someone says, gee, things look a little strange. What's going on? And then investigation work is done. Maybe something is found. And then you keep going deeper and deeper into the process. More data, more understanding. We do what's called a remedial investigation. That's go out and collect a bunch of data, then a feasibility study, and then what's called a cleanup action plan gets produced. And the liable party, in this case, the port, produces what's called a draft cleanup action plan. And so that's where, as the liable party, you write up a plan that says the way we would intend to meet the requirements for remediating this site are as follows. We're going to go out and dredge the site. We're going to cap the site, whatever you're going to do. The liable party produces that document in draft form, gives it to the Department of Ecology. Department of Ecology says, thank you very much. We will now take that document and make it our own. And what they do is they take that document that you've given them, they accept sections that they want, they reject sections that they may want, they rewrite sections, they may take different pieces of different remedies, and they, as the regulating entity, then give you back a cleanup plan and says, here you go do this to clean it up. And so the liable party makes a suggestion, ecology actually then embraces what the cleanup plan is. So right now, we are sitting up here somewhere about step 4 to 5. We are somewhere between a remedial investigation, feasibility study, and the cleanup action plan. A lot of data has been collected in Butt Inlet over the years. Unfortunately, most of it is now 10 to 20 years old. And so our amount of current data that covers all of the contaminants of concern we have to look at is very limited. So one of the first things we have to do right now is go out and do an additional investigation plan, collect a bunch of sediment, send it to the lab, analyze it for chemical content, so we can then figure out what our nature and extent of contamination is that we may actually have to clean up. Anybody have any thoughts or questions on any of that so far? Yes, sir. Yes, please, if you don't mind. Otherwise, folks on the Zoom meeting cannot hear you. Thank you.
Jim Thornton, are you going to produce a public plan on how you're going to collect the data?
Oh, yes, that will all go into ecology and then be put out for public review by ecology.
So ecology will put it out.
Yes.
Because what I want to know is when you do the coring, do you do it in segments like 3 centimeters, 4 centimeters, or do you mix all the sediments and come up with an average?
No, we do them in increments, generally about a 1 foot increment.
Okay, but when you dredge it, it's all mixed together.
Uh,
Yes,
when we dredge, everything from the cut line up gets mixed together when it goes in the barge, yes.
right. So do you know what the contamination level is going to be when you've mixed it all up? So when you do your corings,
Mhm,
you segment the core, like you said, in layers,
mhm.
which you do by sight. And then, but then we also mix them together and see what the contamination is when you have the mixed.
We do homogenization of different segments sometimes, but the way we would normally come up with a total concentration would be a weighted average based upon the sediments that we've actually analyzed.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. And so what are we looking to do here as part of this overall project? Again, we have to go out and get more data. We have to work with ecology. We have to come up with a plan that satisfies them. But in terms of the overall objectives, we got to remove the legacy contamination that's out here. We got to get the bay cleaned up. We got to meet ecology's requirements. We got to reset it so the Corps will come in and take over dredging in the future. We want to maintain the operations here at the port. We have Swantown Marina. We have the Deep Draft Marine Terminal. We want to make sure that those things are viable going forward throughout the remediation and after the remediation. We have the planned removal of the dam, the estuary project over here for Capitol Lake. And when that is done, if that is done, that will allow sediments that are currently caught by the dam to migrate down into West Bay in the future. And so we need to make sure that we set West Bay ready to receive that material so that those sediments do not come in over top of the contaminated sediment and increase the contaminated volume that would need to be dredged if you were to go in and dredge that material after the clean material come in. Another objective is to get more public access out here if we can. Everybody likes to get out to the waterfront, take advantage of the water. If we clean up the sediments, if the bay is better for recreational use, we want to make sure that people can get out there. And then if we're going to dredge up all this material, if we can avoid sending it to the landfill, that would be great. Having sent millions of cubic yards of material to the landfill over the years, not sending some of this material to the landfill that it's not so contaminated and using it in a way that is beneficial to the port and the public would certainly have long-term benefits, as opposed to the very large carbon footprint that results when you put sediment in a rail car and have to send it to Eastern Washington to go into a landfill. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Joanna again. So you mentioned the transition of the estuary that's going to be coming with the removal of the dam. Does this project have visibility on the timeline of that effort and how it will correlate with this effort? In other words, are you in communication with the entities that are moving that project forward?
Yes. We are very aware of their timeline. We have communicated with them. We are planning with them, and we are 100% in lockstep that our current schedule would let us get our work done in time to accommodate their work.
Is there a timeline that can be shared with those two projects with the public, or is that just an internal thing?
Well, their current plan is that the dam would come out sometime 2032, 2033, and we will sneak in and get our work done ahead of that.
Perfect. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Lee Renner is my name. I wanted to thank you for this great presentation. My question is, that what you just presented is the crux of the matter, sir. Essentially, what you were suggesting is you're taking the dredged contamination from Bud Inlet and then stockpiling it on the isthmus here, where we now stand, close to the isthmus. And essentially, once this contamination is stockpiled on the isthmus, then over time, the tremendous rains that we have will allow the contamination, the dioxins to come out of the solids that you are going to pile of the dredged soil back into the water and back into the land. And so that's the crux of the matter. How long are we looking for these contaminated groups of chemicals to come out and go back into the water column and affect the water and the animals? Thank you.
That is an excellent question. If we were to execute the project the way we are saying, and these contaminants were to wind up back in the waterway, that would be a failure. The idea is that when we manage these materials and we bring them uplands and we put them into a management cell, a confined disposal facility, those materials are managed in perpetuity so that the chemicals cannot leach out and get back into the waterway. The sediment cannot be eroded and go back into the waterway. So it'll be placed in a way, it'll be capped, it'll be managed such that that linkage is not possible.
And I'm sure you are going to address the fact that with sea level rise, the city of Olympia and the Port of Olympia have been engaged in studies regarding the fact that we will be flooded here on the isthmus. The sea water will come up over these contaminated dredged sites.
Yes, sea level rise is obviously one of our concerns. We had an episode last December with the big king tide and some other events that showed exactly that. And so what we are hoping to do here, again, managing the contamination so it doesn't cause an environmental problem in the future, we are looking to take what would normally be a waste product, this dredged material that would go to a landfill, and instead beneficially reuse it, provided the contamination does not cause a problem, so that we can address the sea level rise. Jim, did you want to add anything to that? Are you okay? Anybody else on? No? Okay. These are great questions, by the way. Thank you so much. And these are things that, to be honest with you, we could talk about at 2 o'clock in the morning when they wake me up at night and I'm sitting there thinking my way through them. So. All right. And so in terms of our project area, I mentioned a few different things earlier. Right now, East Bay, West Bay, Bud Inlet as a whole. The port started off working with ecology on what's called the study area. So you can see a rectangular shaped area up there. The port did some initial investigation work in there, and ecology has said, that's great. Now you got to expand that out to the full width of East and West Bay here. And then we got to start looking to the north. And so we are focused now here in the southern area of the inlet, because that's where most of the contamination and operations are. But we will be forced to go further north here with ecology over a while. The definition of the site by ecology's terms is wherever the contamination has come to be. And so until we go out and do some more investigation to figure out exactly where it's at, we don't know exactly what the limits are at the moment. And so that is an interactive process where we have to go out and get the data, and then that will fully define the site, and then we'll advance the project like that, working under ecology's oversight. And so when we talk about the goals here, we want to remediate the sediments. We want to make sure we maintain the viability of the port. There's a lot of jobs here. There's a lot of people that make a living here. There's a lot of benefits to the community. So we want to make sure we preserve all the things that are going on. We want to get better community access, better community use of the waterway, and we want to make sure that we improve the overall habitat out here so that we have better fish runs, Olympia oyster, better use of the waterway by the public, etc. And so, as I mentioned, the potential liable party, the PLP, in this case, the port, under the ecology process, they do their investigation work at the site, and then they put together what they call their preferred remedy. And so you go through your alternatives analysis, and we could do this, we could do that, we could do this other thing. This one remedy seems to fit best. It meets ecology's requirements. It meets the future use of the site. It has whatever other cost benefits, public access benefits, habitat benefits to it, etc., that comes up with a preferred remedy. And so the preferred remedy that we have been discussing with Department of Ecology to date is based on maintaining the existing current site use, that maintains the navigation channels. And so there, in order to get the Corps to come back in, per the question before, we got to clean out those navigation channels, get them back to depth. And then once they're clean, the Corps will come in and maintain them again in the future for the port. So we want to get the dredging done in the navigation channels. We have other areas outside the navigation channels, still to be fully delineated based on future sampling, where we probably have some higher levels of contamination, sometimes called hotspots. Those types of things we will want to go in and remove also, so that those higher levels of contamination don't pose a potential recontamination issue for the areas that we clean up. And then in areas that don't have such high levels of contamination, the sediments are stable, we might look at using some of our other remediation tools that are in our toolbox, such as capping or enhanced natural recovery, that are less impacting on the existing environment than dredging. You got to remember, when we go into dredge and clean out contaminated sediments, we wipe out the benthic community that's there at the moment, because we take them and their home and everything else with it, and then that has to reestablish over time. And so as we look forward here and we say, well, gee, that's our preferred remedy, what does that look like so we can start planning? We made some calculations and we say, well, gee, if we have to dredge those channels back down to that depth, that's going to give us about 560,000 cubic yards of sediment. When we do additional investigation work that might show where some of those hot spots are and what their size is, that volume number could go up. If we go out and do sampling in the nav channels and we find that there's less contamination, that number might go down a little bit. But right now, that's our best planning number looking forward that we are then using for budgeting, project metrics, et cetera. And so right now we say we got maybe 560,000 cubic yards of impacted material to manage, but that is a temporary holding number until we go in the field and do additional data collection to get to the next level of certainty. Yes, ma'am.
One aspect of this that you haven't broached, perhaps you will in the future, is oxygen content of Bud Inlet. I know that the Department of Ecology has looked at the oxygen content of the waters of Bud Inlet, and one part of this puzzle is the lot sewer treatment plant. And also you talk about contamination that's inherent from the legacy industry, but you haven't really mentioned the contamination from the culverts that come into Bud Inlet from, let's say, under the Moxie Creek, the Moxie Creek culvert. As I understand it from the stormwater litigation that Port of Olympia has undergone for the past several years, that stormwater culvert from the Moxie Creek has been contaminating this area of Bud Inlet that you're designating. And essentially, how does this whole part of oxygen level tie into this, and how does it tie into the lot sewer treatment plant? Thank you.
There's a lot to that's a great question, but there's a whole lot to unpack there. So I have to ask you to bear with me for a minute. DO, dissolved oxygen. Bud Inlet is very impaired for dissolved oxygen. There's a TMDL requirement out now, total maximum daily load. And those studies to date have found that the biggest impact of that low DO is Capitol Lake. Okay, so that is an issue there, that when they theoretically remove the dam, that should help the DO issue here in Bud Inlet. Now, stormwater outfalls are always a potential source of contamination. And the fact that you bring up Moxley Creek specifically is very prudent. It drains a large watershed. It has a lot of outfalls that actually drain into the submerged portion of Moxley Creek. So its drainage basin is quite large, and we do have contaminated sediments over there, and there is an old lot outfall over there. And so that is an area where we will be doing significant additional data collection in the future to unravel that issue in greater detail. Does that get to your answer, ma'am? Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, my name is Quentin Phillips. You said theoretical removal of the dam or possible removal of the dam. Is that still something that's being studied?
It's not my project, so I know that they are moving towards that direction, but I don't know with what certainty. Yes.
Harry Branch on Zoom.
Ah,
Harry,
Mr. Branch?
Yes, I'm wondering if surface benthic samples are going to be taken, just the top 2 centimeters.
There's been a number of benthic studies done in the past. We are still talking to ecology about whether we would do more benthic sampling at the moment or whether we'd be focused primarily on contaminants of concern. But we are planning to do a lot of surface sediment sampling to analyze for contaminants of concern.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Question from the audience here.
Tim Thornton again. He mentioned benthic sampling. Are you going to do bioassays?
We're not currently planning on it because we're not looking to dump material out in open water.
No, I'm talking how lethal and chronic the current contamination is on the benthic community.
We are not currently planning to do any more benthics or bioassays at the moment. We have cleanup levels that we are establishing based on the contaminants of concern and the previous studies that have been done. We just need to get a larger geographic area.
Okay.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, thank you. And so, like I said, if we go out here and we dredge up 560,000 cubic yards of sediment, give or take, that's a big number, hard to imagine. I don't know how many Olympic swimming pools it is. That's a metric folks like to use. I don't know if it'll fill the Kingdom. I can give you a better metric that I always use. Dump truck that you see going down the road holds about 10 cubic yards. So if I got 560,000, I got 56,000 dump trucks loads. That's a lot of mud. So that's why we don't necessarily want to put that on the road and haul it to a landfill. We'd rather manage it here on site if we can. And so that's why we're looking into the idea of what can we do to safely manage this material on site and turn it into a positive instead of a negative, so we can use it to do things like address sea level rise. And we recognize when we go out here and we do our sampling, we're going to have various levels of contamination. We're also going to have some sediment that's probably got a bunch of debris in it. And so sediments that are really heavily contaminated and debris will go off to the landfill. Stuff that's lesser contaminated, we'd like to be able to use and manage here on site. And so we will be doing a break line in there based on the future sampling to figure out what the optimum way is to manage this material.
And I'm just going to add really quickly that any plan for managing sediment in the uplands would have to meet all of ecology's requirements for protectiveness and permanence and all of the most stringent cleanup requirements.
So again, the port trying to do this in a way that provides the maximum benefit to the public, the folks here in Olympia. We are doing this in a holistic way. We have approached the other partnering agencies in the area. We've had meetings with the city of Olympia, Thurston County Regional Planning Commission, sovereign tribes here in the area. And we are talking about different projects that we can do out here. And so we've been talking about the Capitol Lake Dam removal, how that might impact things. We've also been talking about Moxley Creek and the outfall over there and what can be done there to provide overall greater benefits than just remediating the sediments themselves. So we've been doing quite a bit of outreach with these other entities and are trying to put together a project that provides the maximum benefit to all. Here we are on the Deschutes Estuary again. We've already touched on this a few times. As we mentioned, we are working with Department of Enterprise Services, figuring out what their schedule is, what their project looks like. Their current planning date, as I mentioned, is the dam could come out in 2033. And we are planning to have our site ready to work with their site when we reach that date. As far as a timeline, again, here's a hypothetical timeline. But again, our game, if you will, is working back and forth with ecology to get through these goalposts to get to actual construction. By that, I mean that agreed order I mentioned says we have to write certain documents. We give them to ecology. They review, they give comments back. We have a set time frame to address those comments, give them the document back. Once that document is acceptable, Maybe it's the alternatives analysis. Then the next thing would be a data gaps memo that we've done. Right now, we're working on a field sampling plan to go in the field and collect additional data. Some point in the future, we will get to a cleanup action plan. And then once all of that is done, we will actually get to the point where we're ready to do field construction. But right now, that's a number of years off. The optimistic early start would be around 2026 for East Bay. Remember, we can only work in the water from July 15th to February 15th of any year. And so when we say 2026, that's at the earliest, July 15th of 2026. Because we can only work in the water for that set number of months a year, it is really critical on these big projects that we are ready to go at the beginning of what's that fish window. If our project is getting delayed and instead of being able to start construction on July 15th, we're not going to be ready until September 15th. A lot of times these projects then get delayed a year because you need that full in-water work window to get enough work done to make sense. And starting halfway through the in-water season doesn't give you that lead time. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, sir, could you briefly explain why this window exists? What is the biological mechanism of these animals that you are speaking of in question? Why do we have that window of July to February 15th? Thank you.
Has to do with salmonids and all the other species that are in the waterway, and those dates are put out by National Marine Fisheries Service and Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. Those are regulatory numbers. Thank you. Great question, though. Any other thoughts, anyone? Okay. So where are we at now? I've already kind of beat around this a little bit. Our team has been working on the project for about a year now. In that time, we have worked with the port. We have gotten this new agreed order amendment in place. We have started working at the deliverables that are required by it. One of them was a revised alternatives memo. Ecology has that has the preferred remedy I mentioned. Ecology is reviewing that. We've also submitted to them a data gaps memo that goes through, looks at the existing data we have out here, compares it to what we need to actually do design. Because what we need to investigate a site versus what we need to do design are two levels of density different. We need much more data to get into design than we do to just look at the site initially. And so right now we are planning to go out and do more data collection, answer some of these questions we've talked about here tonight. We are actively working with Ecology. And again, we try to work cooperatively, even though they are the regulator and we are the regulated, but we are working with them constructively to try and expedite this field data collection. By the typical schedule, all that stuff on that agreed order amendment I mentioned, we would be in the field doing that data collection late next year, fall of 2024. We are trying right now, working with Ecology, to advance that program by up to a year and get in the field this fall, winter, to start collecting that data so we can start to answer some of these questions. Yes, ma'am.
So essentially, you haven't really approached the topic as yet of that management cell that you were talking about. You said you are going to be able to build a management cell with these very highly toxic contaminants that will sit there in perpetuity, which means forever and ever. They'll be covered with water from stormwater issues or covered with water from sea level rise. And I'm sorry, you're going to cover how you're going to make these contaminants not precipitate through the soil back into the water column? Are you going to go into those issues?
All not here tonight, but
Oh.
that will all be part of our design in the future.
So
Yes.
at what point will you go into how you're going to allow these management cells to hold these extremely dangerous toxins in perpetuity? That's my concern. I don't see how you're going to do it. And I was hoping you'd broach that. Not tonight.
No, not tonight. That's a very detailed conversation to
Well,
get
that's the
into.
crux of the question, though, isn't it? Are these highly contaminated, very dangerous toxins, how are they going to be contained in perpetuity? And you're not going to talk about it tonight. You don't know when you're going to talk about it. We, as a public, we want to know how you're going to do this. And that's the crux of the question. Can you do it? And how are you going to do it? Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And we will get there. It requires detailed scientific study of the material. And then we have to go through an analysis to look at how we will both stabilize that material chemically and then how we will contain it on site. And it will be a full scientific and engineering analysis to come up with those answers and then present those to both ecology and the public. So, yes, man, I appreciate your concerns. Those are very real issues that we are working with on a daily basis. Yes, sir.
Jim Thornton again. The contaminants he's talking about are hydrophobic. They're going to attach themselves to carbon, and they're not going to be released from a confined cell as long as you can keep water out of it, oxygen and water out of it. So that's what he's talking about, is an encapsulated fill that keeps the water out, keeps oxygen out, and the contaminants won't move because they're hydrophobic and they attach themselves to carbon. And if there's a lot of woody material in there, as we would suspect there would be in this dredging, those contaminants shouldn't move. Now, there will be, I'm sure, and we will certainly be following it, a really strict monitoring program to make sure that none of those contaminants are moving out of that cell. So I think that's the simple answer for Ray.
Thank you, Joe. I didn't want to get into the details there, but yes, you are dead right. And we do have very high carbon content. The Bud Inlet sediments have high carbon content to them in their existing state.
I'm just going to add again that, and nothing that we would be, that we're currently describing as a management strategy for any contaminated material would be without engineered controls to prevent exposure and migration, recontamination. As Rob said earlier, recontamination would be a failure of the project. Creating a situation that was some potential threat to human health or organisms would also be a failure of the project. And anything that would be implemented or constructed would have to be approved by the Department of Ecology and meet their standards for permanence and protectiveness, and would be subject to public review prior to implementation.
We were bringing this up, as you may remember, I believe it was 10 years ago, a number of local citizens sued the Port of Olympia regarding the stormwater here at the marine terminal going into Bud Inlet from the Weyerhaeuser log yard. At that point, Department of Ecology helped the Port of Olympia implement the building of a stormwater facility that would take care of any waters coming from the marine terminal yard into Bud Inlet. At that point, after this facility was built, it received various awards. And then, of course, as we all remember, it blew up and right over here and actually hurt a woman. And of course, she sued the Port of Olympia. And so let's face it, it received an award, Department of Ecology supervised it, and it was a great facility. And then it blew up and then it broke down. And how many years did we have to wait for it to be rebuilt? And all that stormwater was going back into Bud Inlet. And now Bud Inlet is full of jellyfish. There's hardly anything alive out there because the failures of technology. We have a little quirk. It blew up. It hurt a person. And then failures of the Department of Ecology. And we don't have any faith anymore. I'm sorry, sir. We don't have any faith in the Department of Ecology doing the right thing because we had a little blurb. Somebody got hurt and something blew up. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate your concern.
Do you have a question? No.
How is this going
No.
to be? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, and I appreciate your concerns, but I want to be mindful of time and allowing us to go to Zoom and make sure we get through the rest of the questions that are pertinent to the presentation that we're watching here this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Janet Jordan. You said something that kind of puzzled me. You said you were going to dispose of the spoils of the dredging in an upland site and it was going to be beneficial. But then, of course, it's going to be capped. And so it isn't going to be used for habitat or growing trees or anything else that I can think of. As long as water can't get into it, it can't be used, right? So how is it beneficial? I was just wondering.
Well, we have a number of ways to define that. One is that we have the sea level rise issue that we have out here that is very real. And we know that in order to address that, we're going to have to either build dikes and levees or we're going to have to raise the level of the ground. And so here, even if we cap the material, as you said, that it doesn't grow trees, we can use it to physically raise the ground, still put our operations back on top of it in a way that those chemicals are bound up and do not re-enter the waterway. And we are beneficially reusing the material to provide that increase in elevation that otherwise we would have to go mine material somewhere, haul it in and place it to raise the land. And then we also have hope that some of the lower contaminated material, and again, we have to go out here and do analysis on a three-dimensional basis to map all this out. But some of the material that is lesser contaminated or not contaminated may be suitable for other beneficial reuse, such as planting trees and other things like you mentioned. We have to get more data to really get into the finer cut on that. Yes, Missy.
I have Harry Branch.
Yes, Mr. Branch, go ahead, sir.
Yes, I'm wondering if we know the location and the condition of the slurry wall. When in 2000, when we were putting the Cascade pole site in, we realized, I guess, that the contamination extended beyond the property line to the south. And so a slurry wall was constructed to surround and contain that. And I understand that wall is over 3,500 feet long. So that would encompass, most of the log yard, I would think. And I wonder what all is included in that. It looks to me like we've had some sloughing and other issues that were outside of that. I'm wondering if we got everything when we did that. And what condition the slurry wall is in now. Has there been any softening or undermining? And if we put material on top of that, is it going to be more difficult to maintain that? Anyway, that's my question. What about that slurry wall?
Excellent question. Yes, we are quite familiar with where the slurry wall is and familiar with the Cascade pole site. We would be looking to capitalize on that existing slurry wall by putting some of this more contaminated material on the land surface above it, and then revisiting the way that site currently operates so that these sediments and that impacted material that's currently there are managed as one unit. As far as material being outside of the Cascade pole wall, I have not heard of that, but that is something we will look into. Thank you. Did that answer your question, Mr. Branch?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? All right, so where's the money come from? Everybody likes to know where the money comes from. And so the ports funding team has been out looking into couch cushions and came up with a few dollars. One of them is we have a direct appropriation from the Department of Commerce for $2.2 million. And then we have $10.5 million in remedial action grants from the Department of Ecology that we are currently using to fund the work that is going on. And then there is a continued outreach to locate additional sources of funds, either from additional grant sources or from potentially other liable parties, et cetera, as we continue to develop the project. And with that, we managed to somehow come in at exactly 6:30. You all asked exactly the right number of questions. Well done. Thank you.
Do you have questions about pertinent to the presentation, ma'am?
Yes, you mentioned the costs.
Yes.
You didn't say essentially how much this was going to cost, though. You say essentially where we're going to get the grants, but you didn't say how much this is going to cost. Thank you.
We are still working on the final costing. We have some preliminary numbers that are based on kind of assumption multiplied by assumption that gets us somewhere up into the $100 to $200 million range. But again, until we go out and do more investigation, more analysis, and then synthesize that data, we can't get to a finer point on that cost subject.
Missy, did you say we have a question on Zoom?
Oh, yes. Mr. Branch, go ahead, sir.
I'm just wondering if I could get a copy of a map or something that would have the location of the slurry wall on it.
We do, I'd invite you to go to our website, and our website has information on there. I can't speak to the exact map, But also, if you go to the Department of Ecology, they also have Cascade Pool and they have extensive maps on there as well.
Okay, I'll check it out. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Mr. McGregor.
Bill McGregor here, and I had two questions on, the one has to do with the additional testing you're going to do out here now that it's been about 10 years since the last kind of complete testing project was done. During that time, there's been considerable sediment that has come down from the Deschutes. And are you testing in those areas that have more of that sediment to see, make sure that that is actually clean? Or are you looking for some of the same chemicals that we're already trying to get rid of out there? That's my first question. And the other one is, are we confident that the new sediment isn't bringing more things like, farmers farming out there, putting fertilizer on their yards and stuff? It gets into the river, it comes down and goes out there. So what are we going to be able to do about keeping the sediment coming in clean?
Okay. Not sure if that was 2 or 3 questions. I had an answer to 1 and 2, but then you got me with the third one there. Thank you. Excellent questions. In terms of new sediment coming in, we are going to go out and do a holistic look at the sediment in Butt Inlet. So we are going to go out and do surface sampling on a wide area basis so that we can look at what the nature is of the most recent sedimentation and how it has impacted the site. And then one of the things that we need to do as part of what's called source control and remedy protection is look at the quality of incoming water and incoming sediment, both from Capitol Lake and from any of the outfalls out here to make sure that we don't recontaminate the site. And so stormwater runoff, I often joke about the one farmer that's way up in the watershed that still has that old drum of oil that he only uses for dust control in the middle of the summer. And it just happens to have a little PCBs in it. And so, yes, the watershed size and the fact that these inlets, these waterways are all the way down at the bottom of the watershed. So everything that happens up in the watershed comes down here. Yes, sir.
Anthony Hempstead. On the funding, that's a huge delta between the money that we have and the money that we might need. And getting another $100 to $200 million between now and having this done in 2032. How realistic is that? And where is it likely to come from? Because again, that's just a mind-boggling amount of money.
Yes. We will continue to talk with Department of Ecology about additional remedial action grants. Those come out of the HST, the Hazardous Substance Tax Fund. We will continue to chase other funding from the federal government as available from a variety of sources. We will look at funding for stormwater control, et cetera. And then there's also research going on into potentially other liable parties that could be brought to the table. Jim or anybody else want to?
No, I think that's comprehensive.
I'm sorry, part of the puzzle that you didn't address was essentially going back to this oxygen level in Butt Inlet. A part of this puzzle is the Lot Sewage Treatment Plant, which does discharge into Butt Inlet. The Lot Sewage Treatment Plant is $1 billion entity here on the isthmus. How is this going to fit in to the remediation plan and the oxygen levels and your work here? So essentially, are you working with LOT on these issues, or are you working with the Department of Ecology on the oxygen level issues with LOT, or how does that all come together, or does it?
Excellent question. We are primarily focused on the sediment quality here. That is what the port is under an order from Ecology. Ecology is doing other studies on the DO problem, but we are coordinating with LOT regarding their interaction with the overall project.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to connect with you offline to help you get to the right agency to talk about water quality throughout the Puget Sound and including Butt Inlet, because I think some of the questions that you're asking have it stem beyond this project, and I want to be able to help connect you to the right resources for that.
Thank you, Camille.
You're welcome.
Anyone else on Zoom? Okay, yes,
Hi, Deborah Patton. I'm the chair of the POCAC. I just wanted the audience to know that we did have a presentation a few months ago for the commissioners and the public that talked about these potential liability partners. Is that the right term? And it included the city of Olympia, included Lot. They talked a multitude of businesses that used to be here, that they might be going after the insurance companies that represented those businesses when they were in business. And I don't have the documented, I mean, I don't have the file with me, but possibly that presentation or that list could be posted on the port website so that the public who didn't tune into that meeting could read that and realize that the liability is not just entirely the Port of Olympia, that it is quite a wide list of potential partners of liability.
That's an excellent point.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Debbie, we can certainly look at our website and see if we can ensure that that's posted in the Bud Inlet area and make sure people have access to that. Okay, you're welcome.
Yes, ma'am.
Sarah Tong, quick question. I was just curious, you said that the cleanup might start, the data collection, the first important part may start this fall. That's pretty exciting. What's that dependent on?
Getting to an agreement with ecology that we can go in the field and get that data.
Oh, they just have to agree?
Yeah.
That's easy enough.
You have to agree with the type, the locations, the numbers, and it's very expensive data just to put things into context. When we go out and we take a sample, just one sample, to analyze for the contaminants of concern that we have, PCBs, PAHs, DACs, and furans, that's about a $2,000 lab bill for that one sample. So every time we go out there and we say, take a surface sample there, take one 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 there, that's $2,000, $4,000, $6,000, $8,000, $10,000 to the lab. And so we try to do these things in a way that's prudent, that we are cost effective and get the data in a way that it doesn't break the bank getting data itself. When we go into a core, like you were asking before, if we drive a core into the mud and we start analyzing 1 foot intervals, if we take 5 intervals out of that core and send them to the lab, that's a $10,000 analytical bill for just that one core. And if you figure that we might go out and collect 50 to 100 cores and 50 to 100 surface samples, you can see that we quickly get up to $1 million lab bill.
Rose Gunderson, I'm wondering if we could have a positive ending to this.
It's positive.
Well, it is, but there are a lot of concerns. Are there some similar cleanup efforts that could give us an example of saying this could be done, accomplished, and this is what we're looking at, and give us a good story or comparison? Thank you.
Yes, there's been a number of cleanup projects that have been completed here in Washington and across the country. A lot of the work up in Commencement Bay has been done. We cleaned up most of Commencement Bay, Hylebos Waterway, the other waterways there. Port Gamble Bay, up by the old Pope and Talbot facility up on Kitsap Peninsula. That's all been cleaned up. Port of Everett has done a tremendous amount of cleanup and restoration. Port of Bellingham has done a tremendous amount. Duwamish Waterway is going on now. Bremerton Shipyard was done 20 years ago as a remediation project. So yeah, we have a large, it's growing. When I got into this industry 20 some years ago, our list was short, but in the last 20 years since, we have successfully remediated a lot of sites, but we learn with everyone we do.
I'll also add, Port of Anacortes, Port of Tacoma, Port of Ridgefield, Port of Seattle. There's a ecology, and Washington has a very robust model for Puget Sound and helping communities and ports in particular take the role of the work party and very effectively tackle these very large, complex cleanup projects in a very effective way, and in a way that gives communities the tools and resources to be successful.
Excellent question, though.
I'd like to add a little to that. Essentially, these cleanups, which I have toured some of them, essentially the Environmental Protection Agency, which is the federal government Region 10, still see most of these spots that you have enumerated as being hazardous to human life and welfare, and essentially, that's why we have a lack of mammals in Puget Sound. Puget Sound is essentially dying and everybody wonders why. And now we see the toxics coming off of these locations. This is just
Ma'am,
one
do you have a
penny. Thank you.
question? Do you have a question or
Yes,
are you?
I just essentially, you talk about remediation, but I don't think they have been remediated as per, I don't know if you disagree with me, but it's still a public health safety. You cannot have people coming to these locations.
Ma'am,
Thank you.
we're here late and we'd like to get to the questions and I think we need to wrap up. And I think some of the group has asked to try and end on a positive note, which I would like to say that the fact that we have just an amazing team working on this project, hopefully that brings you some confidence. Everyone that I've worked with on this team has a deep commitment personally and professionally to the cleanup of Bud Inlet. And they've been working hard as the port has tried to, stabilize. And the fact that we've got a team who is willing to try and advance the project by a year, and the amount of effort going into finding funding, we only have an hour here. And as Rob said, I think earlier today, when I was talking to him, this is a highly complex project. We could talk about it for 8 hours a day for weeks, for a week before we could unpack all of the details. And so I think the good news here is that we have a plan to go forward. We're working closely with the Department of Ecology. They'll approve the plans that are presented to them so that we can, continue on the cleanup. Is it going to be hard at times? Sure. Is it going to be complex and hard to understand? Of course. But the fact is we've got a commitment here and we're moving forward after, watching, a long time. I can't speak to the time before I was here, but what I can say is everyone here today who's at the port is committed to the ongoing cleanup and remediation, habitat restoration, and community access to Bud Inlet. So, yeah. And we think we're almost 15 minutes over. Unless there's any more pressing questions, I'd like to wrap us up. And thank you for your time. Thank you for everyone who had questions online and in person. And thank you, Rob. You really took a lot of tough information tonight and you did a fantastic job. Thank you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. I hope to, offer anything I can to make everybody comfortable with the project.
Yes.
Thank you. Y'all have a great evening and enjoy your holiday weekend. Thank you.